What's up, everyone? I'm your host, Maps, and you're tuning into the Wait podcast. And we're back after like a forever time of like 8 months, or probably a little less than that, because Corona hit during spring break, and I was never able to close out my first season. But we're back with season 2. And first off, I'd just like to say that I have a lot of like exciting episodes lined up for the future. Stay tuned for those. Lots of stuff to talk about. So, let's get right into it. Today, my season opener, my first guest, is my good friend Francesca. Introduce yourself, Fran.
Hi, everyone. I am Francesca Sheena. I live in Farley Hall here at Notre Dame. I am from Detroit, Michigan. Well, outside of Detroit. Not actually from the city of Detroit. From Bloomfield Hills. Close enough. I am a computer science major. I'm also really good friends with Bethany and Maria. They were both on this show before. I'm super excited to be here. Super excited to talk about something I'm really passionate about. Thank you, Javi, for having me.
Thanks for coming on, dude. All right, so we can get into it now. So Fran's a little nervous, just saying. And it's fine because I guess it's her first time on the show. Hopefully not the last time. You're a hard person to get a hold of, but I'm glad.
Yeah,
I know you had you can talk about that a little bit. How was your last 2 weeks with engineering tests?
Not great. Sorry for having to reschedule so many times.
It's all good.
No, they've just been super busy. Career fair was last week. Week before I had a bunch of exams. This week's a little bit more no exams. A lot of work, but that always happens. I've had a lot of club meetings recently, more than I thought that I was signed up for.
Same.
So, hey, I'm excited to finally be able to actually come on and talk because I've been looking forward to this for a while.
Did you catch the debate today?
I did not.
I did not either. Today was the Dems versus Rep debate.
Actually?
Yeah.
So, I did see that.
Yeah.
But no, I did not catch it.
Yeah, I did not catch it either because I was working. But one of the episodes I want to do is like have the college reps and Dems come on at the same time.
That would be a good show.
But for this episode, we're going to be talking about women's issues because I guess how this whole thing started off is like, Fran, you told me about like this piece that you were planning on writing for The Observer. I don't know if that ever happened or not.
Yes, so it did not. It hasn't happened yet.
Right.
I still plan for it to happen. It all kind of was starting to come to fruition right before Corona, and then Corona happened and life got in the way and it didn't happen. But kind of how it came to be was in my writing and rhetoric class, first semester of freshman year last year, we were given the opportunity to write a community proposal about any community we were a part of and what we thought was wrong with it, something we felt we wanted to see different, and propose a solution for how to fix that. And so I chose to write about the lack of access to feminine hygiene products on Notre Dame's campus. One, because I'm part of the female community and the Notre Dame community. And so I decided I wanted to write about how I thought they could fix that. Because for one, tampons and feminine hygiene products are taxed, tampon tax. So they're already drastically more expensive than they should be. Plus they're taxed. And on Notre Dame's campus, they're not very accessible. They only sell them in the huddle. The huddle's really overpriced. Everything you buy there is overpriced. They only come in small quantities. And every bathroom, you have to pay for them. And so I chose to write about it because I feel like that's something that you shouldn't have to pay for if you're in the bathroom and don't have one with you. It's just like using anything else in the bathroom. It's necessary. It's a biological function. So I decided to write about it and kind of how I thought Notre Dame could fix it. And my professor really loved my paper, and she told me that I should write I should write about it, like take my paper, condense it into enough words for The Observer, submit it, and see if they would put it in sort of their audience. You can write pieces and submit them and about anything. So she wanted me to submit it and then actually try to create a movement of going to administration and eventually seeing if they would make them more accessible. And I actually this year have seen in more than one bathroom that they are free now, which is good. I still think there's room to improve, but that's how that all came up. But yeah.
Right. So is that still your intent to kind of like have a movement?
Yes, that is still my intent. I haven't been doing anything really with it this year, which I should. I need to reach out to my professors, Professor McLaughlin. She works in the English department.
Nice.
But she was going to help me revise it and kind of work through it and make it more of a piece for the audience that would hopefully agree with me that a change should be made through The Observer. So the idea was like by putting it in The Observer, the hopes is like people would read it, people would kind of it would get the word out a little bit, and then I could try to make that movement. And whatever administration wants me to do, whether it be like get a petition, have people sign it, however they would want me to go about it, I would do that. I still plan to do that because that's something that I still think needs to be changed, even though I've seen it better this year on campus than I did last year.
Right. Do you know of like any other schools? Do you have friends in like other schools that like they provide like hygiene products and stuff, or is that just like a universal thing where they don't do that?
So most schools don't. I actually do. So recently, semi-recently, not recently at all now, January. Time flies. But January, Purdue actually went and made all feminine hygiene on their products free. They do that. That's the only school that I have friends that do that. Through my research, I found some other schools, not very many. And I think it's more common to see at bigger state schools that like that it's more of like a wider community than here. I think it's not an issue that's been raised to them, that's been brought up and said, hey, this we should fix it. At least to my knowledge, it hasn't been brought up. And so I hope that I can be the one that can do that.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's cool stuff, dude.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I like that. Just because, not everybody knows Nano, friend of the show. You know Nano.
Oh, yes, I do know Nano.
So Nano and I were actually having a conversation kind of similarly because he knew that like this is what this episode was going to be about. And one of the things that like came up in our conversation was how like in a lot of schools, like they offer like, I don't know, like condoms for free and just like have them like loads of them in a bathroom. So I don't know. It's fun. It's funny or just probably not funny. It's just like interesting how like they don't do the same for like tampons or like hygiene products for women, because it's like those are like more so needed than condoms. Not that condoms aren't needed. I'm all for the proliferation of condoms or whatever. Just spread them out. That was the weirdest thing I've ever sounded ever. You can tell it's been a minute since I've been doing podcasts, but hey, we're back and. Part of this whole thing is saying things that I'm definitely gonna laugh at later. But yeah, it's interesting that they don't do that with like tampons or like, I don't know, you would just assume that they would have those like super widespread. And I don't know, do you think that like the improvement of like the situation here has anything to do with COVID, or do you think that was the direction it was headed anyways?
It's a good question. I don't know. I want to say probably not. I feel like it's probably not related to COVID. But I also think my view of, I've seen it more. It might just be that I didn't notice it before, which I actually was looking. And I did actually, the gender studies department actually did something where this was not just about feminine products, but the kind of accessibility to different bathrooms on campus. They did a whole study, I guess, where their students went into every bathroom on campus, both individual and bathrooms that have like multiple stalls and stuff, right. And took record of size of the door, whether they're accessible for people with disabilities. But feminine hygiene products was one of the things and how much they cost. And so when I looked last year, I don't remember the exact numbers. I think there were 3 bathrooms on campus that I was able to find that on that list that had them for free. A lot of them didn't even have them at all. That just wasn't something that was there, especially like single-use individual bathrooms. You don't see them in there really ever. But I think it's been getting better. Mostly, I'm hoping that attention's being brought to it, even though I haven't brought attention to it yet. It seems like it has been. I also think that the building, I noticed it here in Duncan. LaFun also has them, so I think it's starting to be in more like super commonly used places, but a lot of other places are forgotten about. I don't think it's entirely something Notre Dame has like fixed in its entirety. I don't think there's been an effort. Okay, we're gonna buy all these and give them to our students, sort of thing. Which part of my paper was like the different ways that they could go about that, but I don't think that's been done yet. But I don't think it has to do with COVID, just because I don't think there's like a direct relation between those two things. That wouldn't really change whether COVID was happening or not.
Yeah. I don't know. I just thought just because like they're changing so much stuff now with like campus life and like residential life anyways, that it would make sense for them to like start fixing some of the other stuff that needed fixing in the first place regardless. Do you know if any of the buildings where they've added them are like girls' dorms? It would like, I would assume that like those are like the first place to put them in, right?
Yeah. Actually, so so in Farley, they don't exist in any bathroom. Like I live on the 4th floor Farley. I lived on the 3rd floor Farley last year. you can buy them, but you don't walk in, and they're not super accessible. And I think the reason for that is because I think it's expected. Like, you're in your dorm, your room is close enough, you can go get one. But sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes it's an emergency and you need it, and it's not there. Which is, I think, a big thing for education wise. Not even just here, but in like other countries where, like, lower income countries, that stops girls from going to school. It's just like it hinders education. On a small scale here, like, I could be taking an exam and like, I could need it right at that moment and not have one, and then I spend time, one, thinking about it, two, having to figure out how to get to the bathroom, things like that. That I think it creates barriers beyond just like, oh, it's an inconvenience. And like, we're very lucky here that I don't think that's something that's super, super prevalent and noticeable, but like, some girls can't go to school other places because they don't have access to those things. Like, one, it's a problem here, but it's a way bigger problem in countries that, one, don't value women's rights as much as we do here, and places that a lot of people can't afford it. And so that's not something that's made affordable at all. So I think, like, it goes beyond just that.
Right. I think that's probably a good segue to, like, kind of expand the conversation a little bit into the world. And I don't know, I think it's kind of crazy how, like, that happens in, like, 2020. And I feel like there's so many things you can say that about. It's crazy that X thing or Y thing happens in 2020. But I don't know, like, I feel like with COVID and everyone being home, it's like we've gotten more time to kind of, like, realize a lot of this stuff. And there's a lot of talk about, even across different like topics, but just like, we should decide what aspect of our previous normal we want to go back to and which ones we kind of want to leave behind. So I think we can kind of, like, grow this, kind of, like, move more so towards, I guess, like, women's issues at large. And I mean, if you want to talk about more so stuff abroad or domestically, I feel like there's definitely a lot to talk about. But we almost got into Ruth Spader Ginsburg, and I stopped you because I wanted to catch that on there. So if you want to talk about that now's a good time. She passed 2 days ago?
Yes. Like I think around 8 or 9 o'clock 2 days ago. I just want to talk about it quickly. If I'm being honest, I haven't followed a lot of what's happened since then as well as I should have, especially with different, with the government and the whole, whether they can elect a new Supreme Court justice before the end of Trump's term. I know Mitch McConnell came out and said some stuff about that, but I think not even on the politics side, Ruth Bader Ginsburg did a lot for women. She, throughout her life, was a pioneer in so many of those things, and it's been so obvious, like, since her passing. I've seen so much support for her, so much, like, people talking about how she affected their life, how she paved the way for so many things for women. And I actually saw this quote. My mom sent it to me. I don't remember it exactly, but it was a quote of hers that was like, something about how the best way to get people to support your ideas is by, like, paving the way for what you want, but doing it so that people can support you, not, like, bulldozing and being like, this is my opinion, but doing it in a way that makes other people want to believe that too and want to support you. I think, which is something really big and just for everyone in general, but she's just a really great model for women. And it's very sad that she passed, especially now at the time with the world being so politically charged on the polar opposites of everything. But I did just want to mention, like, that she did a lot, and that she's, like, that, just bring attention to that since it's kind of timely.
Yeah. Last night, I think they held the College Dems held, like, a little vigil or something.
They did.
Yeah, the grotto. Were you there for that?
I was not, unfortunately. I actually forgot it was happening, but Elizabeth and Lucy, two of my roommates, went, and they said it was amazing, and, like, they talked both about the stuff she did, and, like, they honored her through, like, the Jewish tradition, and, like, it was, from what I've heard, it was really great. I'm sad I wasn't able to be there, though.
Yeah, I'm a frequent, like, visitor of the grotto, and I
am too.
I managed to go last night, not for the event, but, like, after, and it was, like, the fullest I've seen the grotto be.
Wow, really?
Like, lit candles. So that was a cool sight, but also just, like, a nice little detail just, I don't know, like I agree with you. Like I've seen on social media, but also like, I guess that's an example of it. Just like so much support for like her and kind of what she's done. And I feel like there is a lot of uncertainty going forward with regards to like, I don't know, like women's issues and across the world at large, of course, but even here domestically, it's like oftentimes we forget that it's so close, you know?
Yeah. And I think especially now, like a lot of women's issues like at large are, I guess just with the election coming up, like a lot of issues, race issues, gender issues, all of that I think is up in the air at the moment. But I think, which I don't know if you want to talk about this, but one of the big ones right now is the pro-life, pro-choice argument that I think is the most prevalent that has come up in the news in society and talks recently. And that, especially with Trump being president and the possibility of Biden being new president in a few months, they have opposite views on that. So I've been hearing a lot of back and forth on kind of how people feel. That is a very split debate as well. But I didn't know if you wanted to talk about that.
Yeah, we can totally talk about it. I know that like I guess I haven't been following it too closely. I could do a quick Google search here on the computer if we need to, but like I know that like there's been a few like legal cases, or I don't know if like in like some of the southern states with regard to it. I don't know if you've heard about any of that.
Yeah, so I know for a fact that I'm pretty sure Alabama decided that abortion was illegal. But I know a lot has come out recently with the Roe v. Wade issues, and like that has come back up, especially with states now and with Trump's position on being pro-life. I think the argument is whether pro-life is pro-women or if it's, the not letting women control their own bodies. Personally, I am pro-life as a woman. I think pro-life is a lot more pro-women than people think. There are topics within that I'm not entirely sure what I believe, but I am pro-life, and I believe that, women, from what I've learned, I've been pretty involved with that in high school. From what I've learned, women do a lot better when they choose to have the baby than not, but it is a personal decision, so I would never judge anyone either way, but I believe personally pro-life. But I know that no matter what President Trump would think, obviously he's a very polarizing president for a lot of reasons. But the fact that he's pro-life, I think that's come up a lot recently, and a lot of the people in power making decisions are men, and so I think that I think women should be more involved in those decisions, but there's not as many women in politics at the current moment. So I think that affects a lot of what people think about it and how people view it.
Right. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Lots of big points. No, yeah, solid
we can switch topics if you want.
we can definitely continue on it. I'm not pro-life. I'm pro-choice. But I feel like there's definitely like it's such a complex conversation.
It definitely
that makes
is.
sense. Like, I don't know. Sometimes people like talk about like the whole thing in a not very productive manner. I feel like that's with just about like most things, politically speaking. But yeah, I feel like, I don't know, there's like obviously two sides to consider, and it's just like so complicated, and it's a complex issue on both sides, and there's good points to both arguments as well.
Yes,
so it's very complicated. I guess if you want, you could talk a little bit about kind of your experience, obviously being a supporter of women, of course, and also being pro-life, and how that kind of has played out. You mentioned like you were involved in high school. You can talk a little bit about that.
Yes, yeah. So I was part of the pro-life club at my high school, and we had meetings and things, and a lot of it was really educational. A lot of it was kind of when you do talk to someone about it, kind of like what can you do to like prove your side of the argument. But actually, one of the girls that led the club at my high school, she had a baby her freshman year of high school. And so I think a lot of I haven't really ever been close to that. I don't know anyone really closely that's had to make that choice, at least that I know of. So I don't have much like personal experience with it, but hearing her story and kind of how she went about it, but also like we did learn a lot about like Planned Parenthood. That's also something that's in the media right now. The fact that Trump wants to defund Planned Parenthood, and kind of what Planned Parenthood like labels themselves as the services they give. And I actually had a conversation about this with my roommates recently, about kind of just through I guess, going to the meetings and things, we read a lot and saw a lot of videos of people that would go into, for example, Planned Parenthood and request some of the services that they claim to have, and they didn't at the locations they were at. Granted, I've never been to a Planned Parenthood, and I don't know if that's just, those specific places. But there's also, we learned about so many different people that even in the instance of rape and incest, that's a pretty tough decision to make, I guess, like whether, that I think is in its own right something very complicated. Not that the issue itself isn't complicated, but kind of that's, I guess, usually the big thing. Whenever I have conversations with people about it, that's the thing they always go to. Like, if someone's raped, like, should they be required to have the baby? And like, I don't know where I stand on whether they should be legally obligated to. Or I don't know where I stand there, but like, I personally think, like, from what I've read most of the time, it's almost like it brings good from a bad situation. A lot of women are a lot happier when they go through having the baby. And on the other side, like, we learned a lot about women that decided to come out and speak about after they decided to have the abortion, like how that affected them later. And a lot of the times there was a lot more mental implications on them later about that. But I mean, it all depends on where you look, because I'm sure you can find countless examples the other way around too. So I think it's just been, like, from what I've learned, and like, I guess I just believe, like, every human life is valuable, regardless of what stage of life you're in. Because it's not even just an abortion issue. It's, like, assisted suicide, euthanasia, all those things too. That's not as much of like a woman's thing, but just like the one thing I respect both views. The one thing I don't like is when people tell me that pro-life isn't pro-women, because I think it is. I just think it's taken a lot from, okay, a lot of people that are pro-life tend to be men, and that's, I think, like, well, it's not their body, not their choice. And I agree, like, women should have rights to their own bodies entirely. I just think it's a lot more of a complicated issue than just, like, whether women should have the choice of whether they want an abortion or not.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, for me, it's like the part that doesn't, sit well with me is just, or the part that just I have a tough time grasping is the idea of, like, the government, like, imposing
them making,
or like
that
making
decision
somebody
for you.
make a decision.
Yeah.
I find that, like, very difficult.
Why is that a law sort of thing?
Well, just like it's hard for me to like just be like, yeah, because that's cool.
Yeah,
like,
that's
especially
a good point.
I feel like it's difficult here in the U.S. of all places, because the U.S. is all about, like, freedom and personal freedom, and people being, like, I don't know, like, this the whole like right to liberty, and the whole shebang.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think that, like, yeah, I don't know, like, that part sits, I don't know, it's hard for me to just, like, that's a big point for me. I think also there's, like, a lot of talks about, just in general, like a lot of, like you were mentioning, a lot of women do, like, struggle sometimes when they have abortions, but, like, a lot of people think that that's okay too. Like, it's a very complicated issue, and there is so many, like, layers and levels to it that it's hard to kind of cover them all at once. But I do think it's definitely an important issue, and especially with the upcoming election and everything going on. Mm-hmm. It's hard, or it's, like, going to be interesting to see, like, I guess how things going forward, how things going forward. That's a mouthful.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess I wanted to ask you a little bit about how, like, it seems like, I don't know, like, I find that very interesting how, like, you're on, which I'm not, I mean, yeah, you have a good point, like saying that just because you're pro-life doesn't mean you're anti-woman. Does that make sense? So I guess, would you consider yourself, like, a feminist, or not really? I feel like there's a lot of controversy around that term and the whole movement in general. So I kind of wanted to take your take on that.
Yeah, that is a good question, because even sometimes when I think about it, I don't entirely know what the definition of a feminist is, because currently, again, the word feminist is a politically charged word, but I also think that the current movement of feminism takes it to an extreme. So I would say the definition of what a feminist is, yes. I firmly believe that women should be equal in every aspect of the word, whether it be work or just life in general. I do believe that, but I do know, and I wouldn't associate myself entirely, I think, from what people, when they first hear the word feminist, might think of it. I think a lot of the times the word feminist has a negative connotation to it, which I don't think it should. And I think it has a negative connotation, one, because of the current movement, but also, two, because people don't want to accept the movement. And by people, I just mean general people, not men, not women, just everyone. But I would say yes. But I also think a lot of times with feminism as an issue, it's seen as always pointing the finger towards men. And one, a lot of women's issues do stem from centuries history of women being oppressed, just as a lot of other issues do. But I do think there are aspects of it that make it a two-way street. You know, it's like the wage gap is a good example. You know, a lot of the wage gap currently exists because women are, I don't want to use the word afraid, are not as inclined to argue for a higher wage, or aren't as inclined to go for the risky jobs. They don't feel as qualified as men do. You hear a lot, like, men are like, you hear about a lot how, you know, it's like, I didn't know if I was qualified for the job, but I applied for it anyway, and I got it. And, you know, and I think, I mean, it's studied and it's proven that women aren't as likely to do that. And I think, you know, that you can't just take that and point the finger like, oh, men made us do that, because, like, personally, if I felt like I was qualified for a job, like, I would go for it. And I wouldn't, I think, but not every woman can say that. I don't think everyone can say, I'm willing to go, like, I'm willing to put myself out there and to take that risk and to put myself head to head against a man or against someone else for the position. I'm willing to negotiate for a higher wage if I believe that's what I deserve. But I think a lot of that, the timidness that comes with that has come from, again, like, the history of it all. But I think currently you can't just point the finger. I think that's a good example. But I would overall associate myself with feminism. Maybe not to the extremes that most people would. I mean, I will admit, I think a lot of women's issues do come from the treatment of women. Honestly, some of it's by other women. Some of it is by men. Women aren't always the most supportive of each other. But I think society, and as a whole, doesn't promote women to support each other. Women are pitted against each other a lot. And there's a lot of women's issues I could talk about. But I think some of them, are more directly related towards male treatment of women, and some, I think, or that line is a little bit blurrier. Right.
I mean, you can feel free to keep going, but you brought up the wage gap, and I think it's an interesting topic because, well, I guess I should, like, start off by saying that, like, I've never considered myself to be a feminist, but I'm all for equality, if that makes sense. I just think that, like, I guess similarly to you, I don't know, figuring out exactly what the feminist movement is today is difficult, and I think that's largely because so many people proclaim themselves to be feminists, and some of them are, or I guess either the definition evolved and it's something different, or if the definition is the same, which is what I understand it to be, is just like believing in the equality of men and women. I think it's changed, but like that definition, like some people still identify themselves with that definition. Some people take it to, like, I don't know, like an anti-men approach, and some people lie somewhere in between. So it's just difficult to definitely, like, put, like, a label on exactly what a feminist is, and you know, you can't tell people they're not feminists. Mm-hmm. so it's definitely like a complex thing. I think the wage gap is particularly interesting because I think dude, I feel like I've said this way too much. There are two sides. No, but obviously, duh. But I think that, like, on the one what did I say? On the one end, it's like women earn less for the same amount of labor. That's the
yes.
argument. And I like on one side, women also like work less hours than men, and what you were talking about, which is also like a valid argument. It's like they're not as inclined. Women aren't as inclined to like, I don't know, like ask for a promotion or apply for a job. But on the other side, I feel like there's a lot of improvements that like we as a country, like the U.S., can make in terms of like maternal leave.
Yes.
And like, because I feel like I don't know exactly the numbers in the U.S. Do we pay at all?
So it depends on the company or what. So it is situational. Generally, you're paid for a certain amount of time, but again, like if you want a longer maternal leave, you will stop being paid. A lot of companies don't pay. For example, I went to an all-girls high school. Almost all of the faculty members were women, and they didn't receive. I think they received 2 months, something like that, of paid maternal leave, and then they stopped paying them. Like they couldn't even take a full semester off, which I think is crazy. One working at a school where it is all girls, it's all women, like that is women's issues. My opinions on that have come a lot from going to that high school, and I think like the fact that they're not even paid for that. But I think it's hard because then it makes women choose career or children, and right. I don't think that's a choice that should be made. But I also think a lot of companies have also been making more efforts towards paternal leave, so where fathers can take time off as well, which I think is really cool. So, like the company I worked for this past summer, I started in June, and the month before I started, one of the senior software engineers, his name was Matt, he had joined the team after going on paternal leave. So the company I worked for was really cool, but that's something that they offered, which I think that's good because I don't think it should always be like, okay, father works, mom stays home. I think that should be a fluid sort of thing, and each family decides.
Yeah, I think for sure, like there's obviously like a biological element to it where like at the very beginning of a child's life, you like the kid is just more dependent on the mother for sure.
Yes.
And obviously I think that like, because I feel like a big argument that like men make, or I think is like obviously like women work on average less hours, but and of course it's like tied to like motherhood, I feel like a lot, and kids, and like like what you're mentioning, how like it's like the social standard is for like the wife and the mother to stay home and for the father to go to work. And I think that it would help to even those numbers out in terms of like wage and wages if like we had like a better like system or like in place for like maternal leave. But at the same time, I feel like there's a I guess, quote unquote controversial. I don't know. Have you ever heard of I can't believe dude, I had his name and I totally forgot. Whatever. Anyways, the argument that this unnamed psychologist, who I will probably remember soon, makes is that like women are more agreeable in terms of like asking for like wages and stuff like that, which is something that we mentioned, but also that a lot of women aren't willing or aren't let's say it this way, would prefer to not take like higher paying jobs in exchange for like staying with their family. Because I think that do you think that like women are more inclined to stay with their family? Like, do you think I get your point and I agree with it, which I think is just like if a woman wants to go to work and the husband would rather stay home, that should be provided in society and that should be allowed. But do you think, because I think what like an argument that is made is just that like a lot of women choose to not get those high paying jobs because they would much rather spend more time with their family. And I say that coming from like a household where like my mom does most of like, I mean, both my parents work, but like my dad's the one that cooks in the house. And like, so I feel like I've had and he like, I don't know, he does most of the housework. So I've had kind of like an alternative upbringing. But I guess, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that women are like more inclined? What's your response to that argument?
Yes, I agree that I do think women are more inclined to stay home with their families. I think for several reasons. But I think, like having a child, both the mother and the father are attached to the child. I just think a mother plays a special role, especially in a child's young life. But yeah, I don't know if I entirely can like say exactly why, because both parents do play especially like you said, biologically at the beginning of life, mothers do play a special role. But I do agree. I do think women are more inclined to stay home and to choose to not be paid on maternal leave or whatever it is, or decide to leave their job to go spend time with their families. I do agree. I think women are more inclined to do that, which I think contributes to that. But I think like that plays a big factor in the wage gap. But I think wage gap goes a lot beyond that, even and beyond what I said before about women not wanting to negotiate jobs. Like I have known more than one person in my life who has been underpaid for the job they did. For example, my sister. So my sister is, I think of every woman I've ever met in my life, I think my sister is one of, if not the strongest and most intelligent people I've ever met. I look up to her so much, but she's not someone that will sit back and let someone take advantage of something like that. And she's always been like that. And she recently found out that she was being underpaid for her job. And when she had told me that, I was so surprised, because this is going to sound bad on my part, but like when I've been told, women were less inclined to negotiate for things, I was like, oh, that's just because like a lot of women are more reserved, shy, or whatever. Like that's not how she is. And she didn't know she was being underpaid until she spoke to someone at her company who had the same role as her, or used to have the same role as her, now it's a different role, and found out that he was being paid a lot more than she was. So she went and, she brought it up, and it was they had new leadership. It got kind of mixed up in a bunch of things, but she went forward and said like, this is ridiculous. Like and my sister excels at her job so much. Like she does so much for her company, and they value her so much. But she also found out that someone on her team, a woman, wasn't being paid as much as the equivalent male. And like, to me, that really put into perspective, like, that I kind of had a biased view of like, oh, I'm sure that's just based on, kind of some women that just don't want to ask for that. But like hearing that from her, like really showed me that happens to like even the most outspoken, strong, like women that I know in my life. And it really brought it home. Like, and she had told me a lot, almost, she said most of her friends have found that they were underpaid at some point. She was like, she told me she'd be surprised if I didn't encounter that at some point, especially because I will be entering a very male-dominated field. She just said that's something you have to be aware of and something that you need to fight for, because it happens more than it should. I mean, it should happen none, but it happens more than it should. Right.
Yeah. I mean, I'm very on board with the idea that like the wage gap is kind of like a multivariate issue.
Yes.
Like I don't think it's fair to say that like, oh, like it's only due to the fact that like women are women, if that makes sense. But it's at the same time, I see the flip side, of course, and it's not as innocent as some people would make it seem either. I feel like there's a lot of factors that contribute into it, and there's like even in that family case where like let's say a mother does choose to stay at home and would rather not work and spend time more so with her family. I feel like other countries are a lot better than the U.S. at like, I don't know, like having like maternity leave or like something similar along those lines.
Yes.
It is difficult though, because yeah, I don't know. There are so many like factors that go into it that it's definitely hard to just like pinpoint one thing or the other. But I do think that we can definitely do a better job. The psychologist, by the way, was Jordan Peterson, who he talks a lot about kind of like the psychology behind the wage gap. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I just think he's got like some interesting points on like one of the things that he talks about is he works with his like clients to kind of like help women or like encourage them to kind of like look for promotions, to be more like assertive and like outspoken about these sort of things. And I think that, I guess you were talking a little bit about kind of like social norms and how those kind of play a factor in all of it. And I do think that like, I don't know, it's like we have to normalize kind of like the idea of like strong and powerful women as well, just because historically that hasn't been the case. And I think we've been doing a lot better over the past few decades, but obviously there is still some discrepancy, and there are communities where that sort of stuff is even more so limited, especially like here in the U.S. And I think that does help. Like that sort of stuff does help. Just seeing more like women as leaders in society, and like I don't know, like filling those like big roles is important too.
Yes, yeah, I agree. I think I guess like giving young girls like the image of what like a woman is, rather than just kind of like, oh, a princess, this or that. Not that I don't love princesses, because I do, but you know, like giving them those role models, and more the better, you know. Not that just like, oh, these one or two powerful women. Kind of showing them that's normal, and that is a societal norm. And I think we definitely are on our way there. I think very recently, a lot of women's issues have definitely improved. Not that they don't have a long way to go, but I agree that I think social norms play a part in a lot of issues. But I think they play a really, really big role in women's issues, just because women are viewed in a very specific way in society, with a specific, role in their household, body type, things like that. Just like the image of what a woman should be, I think is very, very specific. And I think that needs to be broadened. And I think it has been. It's been a lot better.
Yeah.
But I think like what a woman is and what a woman should be is a lot more of a linear, like there's a lot more of a linear representation of it in society, whereas like that path is not even close to linear, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting too, because like, I guess the next question I have for you is like, do you think that like men and women are better at different jobs?
That's a good question. I would say on the whole, probably most jobs I think should be and can be filled by both a man and a woman. But I think there's an argument to be made on, jobs that require, men and women do have there are personality differences. Like women are a lot of times known to be more, like you would say, like agreeable and caring. Not that men aren't caring. But I think, maybe jobs that are more suited for that. But I think in my opinion, most jobs could be and should be filled by both.
Right. Yeah. I guess the reason I asked that is because, like, I don't know, there was an interesting study that came out a few years ago, I think, about how, like, Scandinavian countries are often talked about as, like, better at being able to distribute, better, they're better at handling, like, gender issues and kind of, like, equalizing things a lot more. I think they're, like, the most equal, like, gender equal countries. But they had a study come out where, like, when they implemented all of those, like, equal, like, policies, like, men and women kind of tended to diverge to certain fields as well. So, I don't know. I think it's just, like, an important thing to consider, too, because I guess the question there is, like, is it then by that logic, is it by choice, but then is it by choice already, or do we need those policies in place? I don't know. It's a very interesting study because everybody, like both people on the left and the right were like super shocked when it came out. Because I guess like what it showed is that like men and women do tend to have like certain tendencies in what like lines of work they prefer to work at, which I guess makes sense because like, I don't know, you have like male dominated like industries for one end of the spectrum, but on the other you also have like, I don't know, like I think it's like 99% of like bricklayers are men, or like most daycare, like like people that work at daycares and work with children are like women. So yeah, I don't know. There's just like certain inclinations, I guess, is what the study showed. So I guess that was why I asked. I do think that like I agree with you. Like jobs can be filled by both men and women, but I think at a certain point, like both men and women will have like certain preferences, and I think it's not abnormal for that to be the case because men and women are different to some degree of an extent, So that whole stuff, like that aspect and that side of it, makes sense to me.
Yeah, I agree. I think definitely like the instincts and tendencies of men and women help lean them towards different job fields for sure. But I haven't read about that study, but I should read up on that. It sounds super interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, and I also think it's important to kind of keep those distinctions to some degree, especially with like kids, because like like fathers and mothers fulfill very different roles in a child's life, and they're both like super important. Like a child not having a father in his life or a mother in his life can like have very different effects. So I think it's important. I don't know. It's like, I guess going back to our talk about like, or when we mentioned like the extremes, it's like sometimes blurring the line too much can have consequences too, and I guess we might not know exactly what those might be. Like, this is like a super severe extreme, but like if we get to the point where, I doubt that we ever will, but like where a mom and a dad fulfilled exactly the same role, what ramifications would that have on society? Would it be a good thing or a bad thing? We don't know, but I think that like both men and women have important like roles to play, and obviously like they shouldn't be restricted to that. But if they have tendencies to go one way or the other, then I think that just makes sense. Yeah. What else? We can talk about a little bit.
I have a topic.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Can I bring it up?
Yeah, go ahead for sure.
I think, the reason it was on my mind was because when we were talking about society and how they react to a lot of this stuff, I think that one of the things that sticks out in my head as like society really hurts women in this way is sexual assault. Not that sexual assault only happens to women, because it doesn't. It happens to both women and men. But I think society doesn't always entirely support women on that front, which I think, which makes it a lot harder for women to want to come forward. But that's just something that came to my mind when the issue of sexual assault and how both society and smaller communities, like how college campuses handle it, I think is something that, but just, that it reminded me of when we were talking about kind of why women's issues are so driven by societal norms.
Yeah, this is actually, I'm glad you brought this up, because I'm taking a CSEM this semester on sexualities and moralities, and a lot of the stuff that we touch on has to do with like consent and sexual assault. And there was this very interesting, I don't know if she's like a social scientist, or there's this woman who's written 2 books. One of them is called, I think, Sex and Girls, and the other one is called Sex and Boys, or Boys and Sex and Girls and Sex, something like that. The girls' book came first, and the boys' book came second. And they're about how she's just interviewing like upperclassmen in high school and like college-age students about like their sexual experiences and all this stuff. And she started interviewing women and girls like at the beginning, and then she started realizing that it was kind of like a male issue as well. And she started interviewing guys. And she's got this great article, which I can send you. I feel like you probably enjoyed a lot.
Yeah, send it to me.
On like toxic masculinity and kind of like the power hierarchies that exist within guys, and how kind of guys function in that manner, and how sometimes that can kind of get out of control and then take a turn for the worse.
Yeah.
And then kind of how those kind of reflect onto kind of guys' relationship with women. One of the things that we talk a lot, or I guess I had a presentation last Tuesday, I think, about kind of how like sex and enjoying sex and like sexuality is not normalized for women at all in society, and how like that plays a role in a lot of like, I don't know, there's like the whole sexual assault environment right now is it's an interesting thing to consider and to analyze, because on the one side, there are definitely like very legitimate claims to like women and girls that were. All right, I accidentally cut the recording, but I'll just clip it out. So sorry about that. Awkward cut. Anyways, going back into the conversation. Sorry about that, friend. I was talking about like sexuality not being like normalized for women, and kind of like this social scientist. Where did I leave it at? About how, I guess essentially the gist of her article is like sex and enjoying sex should be more normalized for women, because it'll help prevent a lot of like issues. Like it'll encourage communication. Like girls sometimes have a hard time communicating like what they're into or like if they even want to do anything at all. And then like the whole like consent responsibility falls on guys. So like that's awful too, because it's like if a girl maybe like she gives consent at the beginning of sex and then halfway through it she like doesn't want to continue, but she doesn't express that and the guy doesn't ask. So that's where I was, I think, was about totally forgot again. Anyways, about how like you definitely have legitimate accusations and those should be taken seriously, but at the same time you have a series of like false accusations that have also been like occurring, and that's like awful because it like delegitimizes the like real ones, and it makes it harder for like women to be heard when like sexual assault and like rape and stuff like that is a real thing, like when it happens for real. So I think that like one of the, like we spoke about it in class and I made a presentation about it, and essentially it was like the consensus that the class kind of arrived at. That's a word, right?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Hey, I'm a brick. Anyways, yeah, was that like consent has to be more of a conversational thing between both partners, and it can't just be like one-sided, and we should normalize sexuality and like enjoying sex and like participating in it for women, so that like that way like they like we can kind of like get past that aspect of like, I don't want it to seem like I'm saying that like women need to communicate more. I feel like it's a both part thing. Like it's the reason why women don't communicate is because, according to her, is because it's like men have like this culture amongst themselves, which I feel like expands itself to generally like society, where like, I don't know, it's like not normal for a woman to enjoy sex or to have sex, or like it's seen, women that have sex and that enjoy it are seen as like not good or like not good fitting partners, and that's very detrimental to the whole. So to the whole sexual experience, and like further like applying itself across lines towards like sexual assault and stuff like that. So I think it was a really good article, and I think that like, yeah, like we should definitely normalize sex and like enjoying sex and having sex for both. Like obviously it's already like kind of normalized for men, but like for women, and I think that like consent as more of a conversation, once women are able to like feel comfortable, and that's normalized, I feel like that'll be very conducive. But until then, the situation is that like it has to become a lot more like, sex has to become a lot more, I don't know, like you can have like those situations in which like you have like false allegations or like real allegations, but there was just like miscommunication, and it's just like a really complicated situation. I'm not saying that's the norm, but those also happen, you know, like, I don't know. It's like a tricky thing in terms of like, on one end you have like real accusations, on the other you have false, and then you have like probably some in the middle too, you know?
Yeah. I think a lot of what you just touched on was things that I did want to bring up as well. But yeah, I think a big part of what the issue of sexual assault in terms of women especially, and that being a women's issue, I think that entirely stems from what you just brought up, the culture from when women are young girls and when men are young boys, what we are taught about sex and about that experience growing up, I think are drastically different. Like as a young girl, like as a woman, there's you're one taught, like you said, like for a guy to have sex with a lot of girls, there isn't nearly as negative a connotation on that as if women have sex with a lot of guys.
Right.
Which like why is that not the same, you know? But I think that's something that we are taught from when we're little. Another thing we're taught from when we're little is like we have to live with that fear. Like we are from a young age, it is explained to us like that those things can happen, and we're just like hyper aware of it all the time, and it stinks that we even have to think about that. That shouldn't have to happen.
Right.
But But I think a lot of, like you're saying, like that it's always brought up this, there's a fine line between, when it's wrong and when it's not. And I think that causes for women, especially, like, you're right, like there's not as much enjoyment and pleasure in that, in the topic as a whole, not even just like personal experience. But I think I also want to like bring up the point that you also brought up, like miscommunication and misunderstanding. I think a lot of times when people come out and say like, I think there was a misunderstanding, like whether it be someone involved in the situation or like if I were to be a third party, like I agree that there's miscommunication. I believe that there was. It's automatically like, why aren't you believing her? And I think a lot of times that is what happens. I think more times than not, women are not making false accusations, but they do exist. And I know they do. And I know it's probably really hard being a guy and having to be hyper aware of your actions at all times. Because not all guys are bad. But like having to make sure everything that you do isn't perceived in the wrong way, I think is probably, I can't imagine, is probably really takes a toll on you and is really difficult. But I also think the lack of support for women when they do come forward, I think creates sort of like a muddled environment of like true, false, like when should they come forward? Like most sexual assaults are not ever reported.
Right.
And I actually watched this movie. It's called The Hunting Ground. And Notre Dame is featured in it.
Oh, you told me about this.
Yeah, and how Notre Dame, it was Notre Dame, Harvard, Florida State. That's the only thing I can remember. But it's all based on how these schools did not, even in the slightest bit, support the women that came forward to talk to them. And it's individual instances. One of the women from St. Mary's was sexually assaulted by a football player. And the police claimed that they couldn't find him for 2 weeks. And he played 2 home games in front of 80,000 people within those 2 weeks.
Right.
So 160,000 people saw him and where he was, but the police claimed to not be able to find him. Like in that case, she ended up killing herself because of what happened. And it's incredibly sad that those are things that happen. But there was a lot of instances of it. But I think like there is a culture around like, one, women not wanting to come forward, but especially on college campuses because colleges don't support them because they don't want to seem like somewhere where there's a high crime rate or a high sexual assault rate. I think it's important to keep in mind. We were told this in high school. When I was a senior, one of my teachers, I was in a contemporary issues class and we were talking about women's issues. And she told us, she was like, this is not something many people know or even think about, but when you look at crime rate and sexual assault rate on college campuses, you might look and be like, wow, that school has a really high sexual assault rate. But actually, sexual assault happens everywhere. The smaller the number, generally, the less the school supports the victims that come forward. Right.
And the less that like the cases are reported.
Yeah, and I know we're running out of time, but I know that also goes into the Title IX issue, the new Title IX ruling that just came out.
Yeah,
that grants more rights to the assailants rather than the victims, and that's like, and it's not.
Yeah.
In support of a lot of things, and I don't entirely know why that happened. I should read more about that, but I think it translates into a lot of those things. But I think it all stems from like the culture around it, like that you mentioned toxic masculinity, but also like what women are taught, and I think there's a lot of like it's never taught or never talked about as a whole.
Right.
Like it's never something that's like we should talk about this.
Right.
As a society of men and women, it's always like, oh no, like you can't talk about that with a boy because you're a girl, or the opposite, especially when you're younger, like learning about it. I think like that is, if society was more open about that, a lot of this could be dissipated.
Yeah, I would agree. I definitely agree. I don't know, it's good that like more and more people are starting to have like more conversations about it, because it is like, I agree with you, it's just like a conglomeration of just like so many factors, and I feel like that's kind of the summary of today. And today's episode is just like all these issues are a conglomeration of a lot of factors. No, but this one in particular is, yeah, it's definitely a complicated issue to solve, but I think an important one to not allow, like, I guess that was kind of my point at the beginning, where it's like, it's horrible that we have like false, like accusations in the beginning, because they take away from the real ones. And it's also like guys are gonna lie about that stuff too. Like if you're accused of something, you're not gonna just be like, yeah, I did it, you know? So like naturally, like that obviously like murkies the water even more and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree that like there are like a lot of cases that will A, go unreported for sure, but then B, it's like even if they do go reported, it's tough to, I don't know, many of the times nobody does anything about it, especially if the accused person is like in a position of power.
Yeah. Yes. But I also think like when these things take place, almost most of the time there's no one to witness it. Right. So there's it's one word against the other, which I think is what makes it such a tough issue. To at least come to conclusion on supporting one or the other. I think like, there's a lot of factors that go into it, but I think the culture around it, like when people try to ask women like, well, what were you wearing? Did you drink all these things? And I think that's absolutely ridiculous because I think that shouldn't change the fact of how like a guy treats someone. But I think it's more complicated than that. Right. And then just being like, oh.
Well, have you seen that post where it's like rape and like sexual assault existed before like women were like wearing like I guess less clothing or like when they were more conservatively dressed throughout history. So like that's not the issue. It's not like what women are wearing or whether or not they like chose to party. It's like definitely like not that.
Yeah. And like even outside of just I guess this opens up a whole nother door, but like some countries it's legal for that to happen.
Right.
Especially in marriage. Like that's
like
that is something that is legal that men can do. Yeah. It's just that absolutely blows my mind. But you can't as a country you can't walk into another country and say your culture is wrong. You can't tell them you need to change this, because culture everyone has different cultures, but it's that's another
right. And I think also that like I think within like a lot of these countries there are also like big movements to kind of like eliminate a lot of that stuff. And like I think that like I hope that those get progressively like start picking up more traction. I do feel like especially like in the Middle East there has been some progress done. Obviously not as much as we would like, and it's not just the Middle East, it's different countries of course. And across different cultures, but yeah, it definitely is a shame that like I don't know. The international cases are kind of like also extremely difficult to deal with because of what you just said, where it's like you kind of gotta. It's also like about state sovereignty. You can't just like get in. Like a country can't just like pop in and be like, "Hey, your laws are different now." So
fix this.
But I think it's also important for us to here at the U.S. kind of like fix things too, because like we're not
our own stuff.
We're not looking too good either. So. Like we did go over by a few minutes, but it's totally fine because I think this was like a good conversation. And we did have like the whole little like audio clip thing happen, which was definitely my fault. Do you have anything else to say?
No, I think in terms of, I could talk about this stuff for a long time, but I think we talked about a lot of the really important stuff that I wanted to talk about. But I did want to say thank you so much for letting me come on and talk. I think it's important to talk about. So I think it means a lot to me that you would open that up and allow me to come talk about it. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for coming on. And I feel like a lot of people aren't open, even like here at Notre Dame, like a lot of people aren't open to talking about a lot of these issues. I think it's important to kind of keep the conversation going, which is like, I don't know, I thought it was like super cool when you told me you were going to write for The Observer, that you will still write for The Observer.
Yeah, that's going to happen. It's going to happen.
So stay tuned for that, for Fran's paper or article on The Observer. But yeah, definitely thank you for coming on, and I'd love to have you on whenever you're free.
I'd love that.
And we can, like you said, we could definitely, like this conversation we touch on a lot of things, but there's so many other stuff to talk about too.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you guys for tuning in. I'm going to try and start releasing episodes weekly once again. I believe that next week I'm trying to schedule an episode with one of my classmates from, or I don't know if he's a TA. I can't remember. Zoom makes things so complicated, but he's from my race and ethnicity and American politics class. Going to be trying to talk a little bit about the Black Lives Matter movement and kind of the aftermath of George Floyd's death and everything that has been transpiring since then. So I'm very excited for that episode. Hopefully we have like no issues with our guest and he can come on and everything's fine, but obviously COVID makes things unexpected. This is the longest outro ever. Anyways, I just want to thank you guys for tuning in. And yeah, hopefully hopefully I'll see you guys next week. Peace out.